So we've heard a lot of really great insights from our customer this morning, Panasonic, and also from our threat panel about the many challenges that are faced by the SOC when it comes to detection and response. And so Eric and I want to share with you how Trend Micro XDR can help you to deal with these challenges so that you can see more and respond faster. So Trend Micro XDR has purpose-built XDR sensors in conjunction with our protection capabilities and our protection solutions across multiple security layers. You know, this is unlike legacy EDR vendors who really focus on pulling in deep telemetry for the endpoint, but only, if at all, have really lightweight access to telemetry from other layers where they rely on API integration with third-party vendors. And as such, they aren't able to detect as many threats as Trend Micro XDR. But we do recognize, however, that your environment has plenty of infrastructure that can provide really valuable telemetry, and not to mention that your SOC utilizes third-party products as well within your SOC processes. And that's why Trend Micro has an ever-growing set of APIs to integrate other products into XDR, and also to be able to integrate with things like the SIM or SOAR solution in your environment. In fact, we actually now have a sensor as well that can pull telemetry from endpoints that are not even protected by Trend Micro. So this really fits with pulling all of that value out of the data that's in your environment. So how does that work? All of that raw activity telemetry and detections is pulled into XDR, where we apply big data analytics such as machine learning and data stacking and expert rules to filter it down to the most important data that we can then correlate. And what comes out the other end is basically a really high confidence alerts that go to your XDR console and can also go into your SIM environment. And the really important thing to remember here is once you get an alert or do an investigation, you want to activate response at different layers in your security environment. And the beautiful thing about Trend Micro XDR is that you can activate that response all from a single place. And you can do your investigation all from a single place, the XDR console, as opposed to going to different teams who manage different security products at different layers. One question that we often hear is, well, why don't I just focus on detection and response and not worry as much about that quick protection? And the reality is you need both. This recent report from Verizon shows the number of steps involved in most attacks. And as you can see, the large volume of attacks only have a few steps, but there are many attacks that exist in your environment for a while and actually go through a number of steps across different security layers. And that's why it's so important to combine strong protection that has techniques that are really quick and able to detect fast-acting attacks, and combine that with the ability to detect slower acting attacks, where maybe something is happening across multiple layers. So from a fast attack perspective, Trend Micro's protection products offer things like virtual patching to quickly detect exploits of vulnerabilities in your environment and bat them away, machine learning, behavioral analysis. But then we can take all of that information and really detect those low and slow attacks as well. So Eva talked about the siloed nature of all of the data in your environment across layers. And Eric and I want to talk about the value of bringing all that siloed data together. So let's start with email telemetry. What's the value of that? So as we've heard this morning, email is the #1 threat vector on how threats get into your organization. So usually you don't notice that until you look at an endpoint. You will see what a threat that came in via email did on your endpoint. But imagine if you're looking at the email telemetry as well. Then you're going to be able to detect, was that email actually sent to 20 other people in your organization? With that information, you can quarantine the email and actually stop it from being executed on your other users' desktops. So you prevent the attack much quicker. And also you save yourself the time of cleaning up, those 20 other endpoints that end up compromised. But email also provides a lot of great telemetry and insights about potentially malicious emails as well. So it will give you indications of maliciousness, like is an email from a newborn domain? Does it have a business email compromised tone? Or does it look like it's actually a compromised internal account by looking at writing style analysis? So Eric, why don't you join us now and show us a demo of how this works with Trend Micro XDR.
Perfect, thanks Wendy. So let's take a look at an example specifically across that. Let's start on the dashboard here. This is the XDR Workbench dashboard, and this gives a list of all the different alerts in the environment. And we're going to drill down into this one. This is suspicious web access after suspicious email. And what this is going to show is a lot of information for the investigator in a single place. So let's start on the left side and just take a quick tour of the interface. You have a quick overview on the top with a score, impacted host, and then you have the highlights menu that kind of shows you what we saw in each of the steps. You notice there's a technique and tactic in there, as well as you can interact with each of these. So as you saw, I just clicked on that one, and now it highlighted items on the right side in blue. So you can actually understand what each of these steps are in the greater picture of the attack. Now, if we go to the right side of the screen, we can interact with this side as well in the relational graph. We can right-click on items, we can add them to searches, we can get more enrichment data, but we can also take response actions like adding to block list, quarantining items, etc. So as you see here, we have the option to block, but now when we go down to email, we have the option to quarantine the message. So if we go back to the original scenario where this is email and the web, we can see in this bottom half of the screen that it actually ties that together in a nice little picture. So you have Sam received an email that had that subject line on the bottom. That email contained that URL, and then the endpoint that Sam was logged into clicked on that URL. So ultimately, it ties all of that together across the different layers.
So beyond email, you can also look at adding network telemetry to your XDR offering. And essentially, network telemetry, what it does is it helps you to slow the spread of threats in your environment, and it helps identify threats that may be persistent. So with network telemetry, you can identify things like CNC traffic that is masquerading as DNS traffic using protocol abuse. You can identify protocol downgrades such as man-in-the-middle attacks. Or you can also look for anomalous traffic that maybe has suspiciously high volume or different destinations that you would expect and are indicative of attempted data exfiltration. But the other place that network telemetry really adds a ton of value is around unmanaged endpoints and IoT devices. So think about that third-party contractor with his laptop that's operating on your network that you have no endpoint security software on. Or perhaps those IoT devices on your manufacturing floor, which don't have an OS that there is any kind of endpoint security available for. Those devices, if they have been compromised, can't hide from the network. Network telemetry is going to help you see if there's suspicious activity happening. Let's take a look, Eric.
Perfect. So now we're going to drill down into another workbench example of lateral movement after credential dumping. So starting with the email example we saw first, they got into the environment. Now they're dumping your credential file and they're spreading laterally using that. And on the left side here, we see the highlights, just like we did before. A little different this time because we have our RDP connections, WMI, but we also have this additional little icon that the mouse is on in the lower left-hand corner. And when we right-click with that, it gives us a menu to be able to interact and open up a network analytics report. And when we open up this report, it will show a network sand key diagram of the traffic in the environment. And one of the powerful things about this view is if we click that little play button right there, it actually will replay the traffic in an accelerated way so that we can see exactly what happened. So what's interesting about this specific attack is that it was across September to October. So it actually was a month, and as you saw, there's not much going on in the middle, and then suddenly there's a whole bunch of traffic at the end of this attack. So initially this started with an unmanaged endpoint, then it moved to a managed endpoint, and then as we scroll down, we're actually going to see it actually ultimately moved back to another unmanaged endpoint at the bottom. And having this network visibility is how we are able to identify those additional compromised endpoints. Now, if we go to the right side of the screen, we have some additional information like the indicators of compromise. So the URLs that were used, we can interact with them as well, including clicking on them, seeing that. Now we can also go to the transaction data. This shows a lot more data, and it's also interactable and enrichable via things like VirusTotal, domain tools, etc. But it also gives you information about the network connection, like the URL, the specific method, as well as the response code. So you can actually see, in this case, it was a get 200, meaning it was a get request that was successful. You also get the user agent. So we've really tried to focus on giving lots of information there to be able to make actionable decisions quickly. Now, once they spread laterally, hackers or attackers traditionally want to get persistence to make sure they stay. And one way they do that is by living off the land, which means using built-in tools to do that. And one of these tools that they use in some cases is the magnifying tool inside of Windows. So here's an example of where they use that specific accessibility tool to actually gain persistence in the environment. Now, once again, we can drill down into items and learn more. So for example, with this endpoint, we can click on it and see who was logged in last, its exact version. But we can also click on other items like this command line, and we can see the root cause analysis, or what we call the execution profile, and we can drill down even further. So we can click on individual items. We can see all the information like the process ID, the user, the exact command line. And we can also keep going back on each item to learn more about how this actually happened. Now, we also have options to interact even further, including taking response actions. So we can add specific processes to the block list. We can terminate processes across the environment. We can also collect the file, so you don't have to go out to an endpoint to collect a random file you want to investigate. You can just ask XDR to do it, and it will pull that file back to help speed up your response process.
Great. Really interesting to see all of those flows and the visualization of the attacks. So one other area of telemetry that I want to focus in on is cloud. So a lot of vendors out there will make the claim that an endpoint is an endpoint is an endpoint, and they don't treat a desktop endpoint any differently than they do a cloud workload. We firmly believe that the cloud is incredibly different than your traditional endpoint. First of all, workloads are often running revenue-generating applications and systems that are really core to your business. So if they become compromised, the impact on your organization is multifold over what an individual endpoint being compromised is. Not to mention that the attacks tend to be different. On the endpoint, there's usually some kind of user activity like clicking on an email or a malicious link that gets the threat onto the endpoint. But when it comes to workloads and servers, it's usually the exploitation of remote vulnerabilities. And that's why virtual patching is even more critical when it comes to workloads. Now, the other nature of the cloud is the prevalence of Linux. So, on-prem tends to, and traditional endpoints tends to be largely the domain of Windows. But when you get to the cloud, the proliferation of Linux and its many thousands of different kernels is really out there. And you need to be able to have a solution that supports all those different kinds of Linux that may be in play in your environment, and also keeps up with the ever-changing nature of Linux kernels. Now, really the biggest thing I think about, though, why the cloud is not, you can't just treat it like it's another endpoint, is that we all know the cloud is a rocket ship. There are new kinds of infrastructure that are coming on board all day, and it's basically a rapid changing environment. So there's the growth in the use of containers, in the use of things like serverless, and the use of things like file storage. So all of these come into play when you're thinking about securing your cloud infrastructure. And that's why Trend Micro has Cloud One that basically provides security services to secure all these different parts of your environment. And we have integrated, to start with, Cloud One workload security into XDR, but you can expect the addition and integration of our other services moving forward that are going to give you much better telemetry and visibility of what is happening in the cloud alongside the other layers of security that you have. So let's take a look, Eric.
Perfect. So let's now that the attacker's gotten in via the email, they spread laterally. Now let's see what they're actually doing to capitalize on this access they have. And one thing they do is they like to ultimately get to your servers, specifically cloud servers. Here we can see a Debian server, and when I drill down into it, you can see that it's Debian 10, and we can see the exact kernel version, so we have lots of information available there. But we can also drill down further and see the root cause analysis of what they actually did on this server. And in this case, it was a cron job that was launching another cron job that ultimately launched a bash script. And we can see the exact bash script here. We can see all the information about it. But what's very interesting about this specific one is it looks a little bit like a spider web. And if you actually mouse over each of them and look at the timestamps, you'll notice that that first cron job actually launches the next one about every minute to every 2 minutes. And actually, that's very key to understanding this specific attack. And what this actually is a coin miner attack, meaning the attackers install their coin mining scripts on your servers, and they basically walk away with the Monero or the Bitcoin that's mined on your CPU that you're paying for. So this actual spiderweb effect actually is very indicative of this specific type of attack. But now let's look a little bit.
All right, thanks, Eric. So one of the last things I want to talk about, we've talked a lot about the value of additional layers of telemetry in XDR, but I also want to talk about how XDR is focused on making good security teams great. You know, Samer mentioned this morning that he's got analysts, that XDR allows new analysts to actually become really effective really quickly. And that's one of the things we really want to focus on, is simplifying investigation and response so that you can get more out of the human resources that you have. So hopefully you've noticed throughout Eric's demos that we give you the tools to really quickly visualize the story of an attack so that you can respond faster and more completely. That's really one of the key things. By having a common single place with XDR to which you can launch investigations across multiple security layers, and you can launch response across multiple security layers all from one place, makes you all the more effective. And these are a couple of quotes from customers who are using Trend Micro XDR to show that it really paints a picture for you. One of them even said it's like reading a book, what you get out of XDR. So let's take a look, Eric.
So let's take a look at the search app now, and we can see first off that we can search across all the data in one place: endpoint, messaging, network, etc. And if we look at the list here, we can see there's lots of different criteria that we can also search for. And some of you might be saying, this looks kind of familiar to something you've worked with before, and that's probably true. This is based on the Kibana open source. So if you're familiar with the Kibana search language, you will have no problem picking up XDR quickly. Now, I've preloaded a couple of searches in here since we do have a fixed amount of time. And let's take a look at one of those, specifically partial command plus tag. And what this is actually searching for is a partial command line as well as a MITRE technique tag that's in conjunction using the AND operator. So we click search and it comes back with that data pretty quick. And we can now drill down into that data and see all of the relevant information that's available from this endpoint telemetry. Once again, we can also right-click on items and interact with them, including filtering searches, doing execution profiles, etc. But we can also have that contextual awareness, where in this case, we can quarantine or block an IP address. Now, we also see the MITRE tag here, and we have the ability to filter. So XDR supports the AND, OR, and NOT operators to allow the SOC analyst to quickly filter down and get to exactly what they're searching for as quickly as possible. Now, something key about this to also remember is that it's not just searching the endpoint and server data, it's also searching across all the layers in one place. So here I have a URL example, and when I click search, it'll come back with data pretty quick. And in this case, the first result is actually an email address, or an email message, excuse me. And here we can see all the relevant information, including the sender, receiver, all the attachments. We can once again interact with it, including quarantining the message. But we have all that available information on that email in a single spot. So we can also respond against all the layers. Now, if we keep scrolling down on this page, the next result is actually using network data. So we can actually see that this agent talked to this URL. So now we've seen the mail and the network data all commingled so that when you're searching, you're truly searching across all the different layers. Now, what's next for XDR? I think Eva at the start alluded to the biggest thing, and that's the renaming of XDR to Trend Micro Vision 1 and us taking a step up there. We're also focused on expanding your view. So adding additional sensors like Cloud One network security and mobile security or mobile endpoint data into this. Also integrating with third parties, more off-the-shelf integrations, as well as expanding our public APIs for custom integrations with other tools in your workflow. And then finally, we're focusing on driving a better SOC experience. Part of that is enhanced response, so having some automated playbooks. When we see one thing, we do the next, but also adding things like remote shell to allow you to interact with the endpoint in near real time. And then finally, the security posture dashboard. And actually, instead of talking about that now, because that's about 2 weeks away, I actually want to step over and show that to you in an early preview. So here is the Trend Micro Vision 1 security posture dashboard. And the first thing you see in the upper left-hand corner is the workbench alert overview. And this is trending over time. And what's important to understand about this is the colors show the different alert severities. So you can see over time that we're trending downward in alerts, but we're also trending downward in both all the different colors, meaning the environment is having less alerts overall, which is obviously good. The upper right, you see more information about all the endpoints in the environment, or the most frequent endpoints that are having some activity on them. And then if we scroll down, we actually see the MITRE attack matrix here. And the different highlighted boxes show where we're seeing specific techniques and tactics in your environment, and which ones and how many. So you can actually visualize where potentially you have activity in your environment that you might need to be concerned about. And then finally, on the lower right, you see all of the different endpoints and email accounts that are being monitored. So this gives you that visibility into all of those different layers, including what we're seeing, for you to compare against your other data sources in your environment to make sure that XDR is seeing everything in your environment. And with that, Wendy, I'll throw it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Eric. So this has been a really quick tour of XDR, and I hope we've given you a flavor of how XDR can help you to see more and respond faster. But what better way for you to understand XDR than to try it out yourself? So if you're a current Trend Micro customer, meaning you have Apex One or Cloud One or network security from Trend Micro, there are ways that you can actually try it out for free. And not only can you try out XDR for the security layers that you have, but there's also opportunities for you to try out additional security layers. So to find out more about that, I'd invite you to visit trendmicro.com/yourxdr. And there is a link to this in the resources section. If you're not a Trend Micro customer yet, we'd love to have the opportunity for you to do a bit of a cybersecurity assessment with us to understand how Trend Micro can help you to basically improve your security posture. So thank you very much, everyone, and back over to Rick and Leah.